Welcome back to another episode of Lush Life No Labels, a podcast where I talk about the struggles and joys of self improvement, anywhere from relationships, career, wellness, and more. I'm Fatu. The story of the week this week is inspired by a conference I recently attended where I led a workshop. Before I jump into my story of the week, I actually have a bit of a fun fact for you that I learned this week. I don't know if you've ever heard of someone named Carl Bushby. If you haven't, let me tell you a little bit about him. He is a British man who, I think 27 years ago, decided that he was going to be the first person to walk around the world on foot. I kid you not, that is literally this man's life. He started walking in 1998, and the goal was to walk over 36,000 miles, 58 kilometers, in 8 years. But he is still in progress in 2025, which is crazy to me. I don't remember where I found out about this guy, but he decided that he was going to be the first person to do this walk. It's called the Goliath Expedition. Feel free to check him out. But before he started walking, he was a British paratrooper, adventurer, and author. And it's crazy because the goal is basically he's going to walk an unbroken path, swimming, walking, basically just doing things and having to get visas. His story is very interesting. I think at one point when he was in Russia, he was almost put in jail. So instead of that, he actually had to swim 132 hours. And people are watching him. There's drone footage. That's just a fun fact for you today that a random man is literally walking around Earth, and that's actually a pretty good feat if you're able to do that. I don't know where he's getting all this money from, though. Maybe he has sponsors, but just a little fun fact for you. So let me dive into the story of the week, which is inspired by a conference I recently attended where I led a workshop. Let me tell you a little bit about this conference. It was for the Jack Kent Cooke Foundation, which is a scholarship organization that was started 25 years ago by a billionaire named Jack Kent Cooke from Canada, who also happened to own the Washington, D.C. football team, formerly known as the Washington Redskins. Now they've, of course, corrected the name and they go by the Washington Commanders. I received this scholarship in their eighth cohort and have been part of the organization ever since. So it was really great for me to go to this conference to help the organization celebrate the 25th year. I'm very grateful that I've been a recipient of this throughout my educational career. Now, each year there is a weekend where all incoming college freshmen, transfer scholars, and alumni come together. I have been an alumni of this organization for a few years now since I finished business school, but this is my first weekend actually going to Scholars Weekend since 2019, so right before COVID. I didn't really know a lot of people who were going, but I'm familiar with the organization, so it wasn't a big deal to go. But as one of the alumni, I actually ended up leading a workshop for the new college scholars. So these are all incoming freshmen and transfer scholars who would be incoming juniors as well. And I've led a workshop at this Scholars Weekend before, but this was one that I did by myself instead of having partners. So it was certainly a challenge for me. The goal of this podcast episode is really for me to talk to you guys about what I did and what my workshop was about. So let's dive right in. Now, I've touched on this so many times in other episodes, but one of my ways of approaching life and thinking about it is that life is comprised of experiences, which I don't think is controversial. As we go through these experiences, we start figuring out for example, what we like or what we don't like, what we want to work on, what we want to stop doing. So that's pretty much what this is. It's figuring out how you can design your life one tiny skill at a time. It's something that is personal, it's something that is experimental, and it's essentially your lab. I won't go through my whole bio with you guys, but basically during the presentation, I walked the scholars through a bit of my background. So, starting from being born in West Africa to moving to Massachusetts when I was younger. Then I went to my undergrad at UPenn. During undergrad, I worked in a lab. Actually, in high school, I also worked in a lab. So I was very research oriented, maybe thought I was going to get my PhD. Then, when I went into undergrad, I was pre med, still thinking maybe a PhD. So I worked in a lab. I also worked in hospitals just to sort of see what else was out there. And all those experiences basically showed me that I did not want to be a doctor. It's mostly because I took all these classes and then I started taking business classes, and that made me much more interested. Also, I didn't want to have to spend the next 12 years in school. So I decided to shift into the business of healthcare instead. Went into consulting for a few years, which did help me gain a lot of different skills that I still use today. But at one point, I decided, you know what, this is not for me. I was burnt out. It was just, there was a lot going on, and I felt like it was time to move on. So then that led me to business school. Business school still focused on healthcare for the most part, but of course, did take a lot of other finance classes and some energy classes. Went right into the industry once I graduated a few years ago, and that's where I've been since. If you remember, I recently mentioned on here that I finished up a fellowship this year in the energy sector because that's something that I've been interested in for a long time. Being from where I am, not having adequate 24-hour electricity like you do in the US. So it's always been in the back of my mind, but I wanted to really focus on that more. I'm at a point now where I'm really trying to figure out the next steps of my career. And all of these experiences have been really interesting because I have shifted. What I am doing today and what I think I might want to do in the future are not what I thought I would be doing at all, especially when I was a freshman in undergrad. That's really where I started this presentation because I wanted the students to see, you know what, this person had all of these things and then has switched, and but she has still had these experiences. And one of the things I want to emphasize about my professional experiences are, one, there are other experiences that I have not shared with you that are on here that are relevant in other ways to my life, such as my previous experiences teaching English, teaching interview prep, resume prep, all of those types of things. So I'm somebody who's had a lot of experiences. Like I said, I have a lot of interests, and I wanted to show that if you're somebody who has a lot of interests, you don't need to pigeonhole yourself into one thing. You can have all of these experiences. It really just depends on what you want to work on and what skills you want to build. That's essentially how I built my career so far, is what are the skills that I want to learn. For me, it's not about a specific title or, whatever else it may be, but that is the focus on my end. So, one thing I want you to think about, right? Let's start with a quick gut check. If your life were a project or a lab, what are you currently working on? It could be your confidence, time management, navigating friendships, figuring out your major if you're an undergrad, whatever is real for you. I'll share for me. Well, I guess I just shared this with you, but one of the things that I'm currently working on is figuring out the next skill set that I want to learn. Another thing I'm trying to figure out with my business degree is, how am I going to use my entrepreneurial skills and background to expand into the different areas that I want to expand into. I've already identified some challenges here, but that's just what I'm currently working on for sure. My last thing that I'm working on is procrastination, which I feel like a lot of us are working on. But yeah, that's where I'm at. But the cool part of this notion of being a designer in your life is that you are both the project and the designer. If you've ever seen something like a vision board, you can see here are all the different parts of my life. It could be my career, wealth, the house I live in, maybe marriage, maybe children, my ideal body, whether or not I want to travel. Those are different aspects of your life on a vision board. And if you have one of those, then you're probably putting down different ideas or different photos based on what it is that you are seeking to get in the future. Similarly, if you work in a lab, you are experimenting, right? You're trying to figure out, okay, what if I put these two chemicals together? What kind of reaction am I going to get? Or you have a hypothesis and you say, okay, I want to put these things together to see if I can get this outcome. You don't know exactly how it's going to turn out, but you do have your hypotheses and your ideas, and you're essentially using that to get to your goal. Now, you don't have to wait for clarity or perfection to start making changes. Designers don't build a final product on the first try. People in a lab certainly do not meet the end of their experiment in the first try. Same thing if you have a vision board. Your vision board is probably going to change over time as you have more experiences, as you figure out what you like, what you don't like, and as you figure out what your next steps are. So, back to the designers. Designers sketch, then they test, then they adjust. So, essentially, they prototype. And that's how I want you to think about your life as a living lab where you get to try stuff on. For example, I talked about my background earlier, where I mentioned I ended up in business, but I was initially on the medical track for most of high school and undergrad, up until my junior year of all things. I was still taking pre med classes. I was still working in my hematology lab, but I decided I wanted to try something else because my interests had shifted. I had never done anything related to business. I'd always been in healthcare, but I made the switch to a different type. Even now, I've always been in healthcare my entire career. And now I've had this growing interest in working in the energy sector because I'm really interested in the energy transition, waste management, all of those types of things. If you had asked me this 5 years ago, there's no way I could have told you that this is where I would have ended up. But it's because of the different experiences, the different things that I've tried that have eventually led me here. So, a framework that I talked about in this session was around thinking of your skills as tools. Instead of asking, how do I fix my life? How do I change my life all at once? You could try asking, well, what skill would help me feel more capable in this area? Because the honest truth is, we don't change our lives all at once. Skills are tools, and tools are what shape the way we move through life. Let me give you a few examples. Let's say you want to work on setting better boundaries. To me, that's like noise canceling headphones for your schedule. Let's say you are practicing self talk to try to improve your confidence. That's like your internal operating system. And let's say you want to get better at asking for help. You could think of that as your shortcut key because it saves time and energy. And the best part of this, every single one of these is learnable. You do not need to be born with it, you can build it. Now, let's make this more real for you. Think of one area of your life that feels messy, stuck, or just off balance. Now, ask yourself, what's one skill that, if I got a little bit better at it, might help unlock this area? For example, let's say you're feeling overwhelmed by school or work, along with all of the other things that you're juggling. Maybe time blocking might help, where you say, okay, from 10 to 12 on Wednesday mornings, I usually don't have meetings. So I'm going to put a hold in my calendar. And during that time, I'm going to check my emails or I'm going to work on this presentation that's due. So it just gives you a dedicated time to work on some of those things that you're juggling and to say, okay, this is the only thing I'm going to focus on. Maybe you are arguing with your roommate or your spouse that you live with. And the skill that you want to improve on is practicing direct but kind communication. You may decide, okay, I'm actually going to go back to Fatu's episode about difficult conversations because I talk about this very thing, how to have difficult conversations. Maybe you decide, I'm going to write down a script, whatever might help you, right? Let's say you are struggling to follow through on some new goals that you made. Perhaps habit stacking would be something you'd want to build as a skill. Maybe you decide, okay, I'm going to actually download one of those habit app trackers and see if that would help me stay on task and stay on the same path to reach my goals. It could be anything, but I encourage you to write that skill down, whether it's on your phone or just somewhere in your notes, somewhere where it's going to be easy to refer to it. Another thing you could think about in your life experiment is not only just the skill that you want to try, but think about how are you going to actually practice or remember this for the next 7, 14, however many days. Also, what is your support or reminder? This type of experiment is not a resolution. I'm not here to tell you, okay, if you do this, that means that great, you're going to have the skill. So it's not a resolution. It's not a forever commitment. It's not like now you have to do that all the time for the rest of your life. This is just a test. Just like in a lab, you have your chemicals that you want to mix together to get a certain outcome based on your hypothesis. You are definitely going to have to run that test probably more than 5 times. I mean, people get their PhDs for years, and that's because they spend years in the lab. That's just expected. Same thing with building a skill. The expectation is not, okay, I'm going to do this thing for 7 days, and now I'm a professional or an expert at the skill that I wanted to learn. No, what you would hope is that you get a little bit better at that each time that you practice the skill until you get to the point where you have it all set for you. So, again, ask yourself, what's one small thing I can do each day to practice this skill? What would make it fun or easy to remember? And what support do I already have? For example, let's say you want to practice being more assertive. Your experiment could be, okay, in the next 7 days, I'm going to practice speaking up once a day. Maybe you want to be more disciplined in some area of your life. You could consider setting one reminder for a task every day and sticking to that. In order to remember this, you could even decide, okay, let me give it a name, like it's a mission. It could be Operation Speak My Mind or something, just to make it a little more fun and not as rigid. Maybe you say, you know what? I wrote it down, I have these tasks, but I still just decide not to do it or I just can't bring myself to do it. You might need an accountability buddy. Maybe you say, oh, I want to go to the gym 2 times a week. But when it comes down to it, you decide you don't want to go. But you have a friend who goes to the gym at least 2 times a week. Maybe you say, hey, Bill, do you want to go to the gym with me on Wednesday and Thursday? And Bill might say, sure. And maybe that's something that will help you because now you have someone who you're accountable to for that type of thing. So it, like I said, it could be anything, but I encourage you to think about, like I said, what the actual skill is, what you will practice to remember it. And then if you have any sort of ways to connect with other people on it or send yourself a reminder. And it's interesting because during this session that I led, all of the scholars were really engaged. It was actually an interactive workshop where I would have folks write down the skill or talk in small groups. This is a podcast, so you are not going to be responding to me. I just want you to think about these types of things as you listen to this episode. One of the scholars asked me a really great question, which was, what's an example of how I built a new skill? Because in this session, I have been talking to you about thinking about the skills and trying to remember it and thinking about it like a lab. But how do you actually learn the skill itself? And my honest answer was I tried and failed a bunch and then built up the skill over time. We can all relate to this. And I've actually spoken about this in a previous episode. The example that I gave was for a goal I had of working out 3 or 4 times a week. The challenge I faced was finding out the best time for me to work out. Initially, I said, okay, I'm going to work out after work, and that will be my time. What I struggled with was whenever I would get home from work, I would be very tired and I would not want to work out. And then I would feel guilty about the fact that I didn't work out and I would feel bad. So I was like, okay, well, when else can I do this? Because I'm just too tired. I can't really bring myself to do this after work. And I don't drink coffee or anything. So I really just had nothing to rely on except my timing. So then I was like, okay, maybe I can work out in the morning because middle of the day isn't really going to work for me. In order for me to work out in the morning, though, I would have had to get up much earlier than I currently did at the time because I would have to work out and then get ready for work and then go to work. So I said, okay, let me try to set my alarm very early on in the day so that I can get up and do the workout and then go from there. But I failed a bunch at the beginning. In those first few weeks, it was tough. The alarm would go off. I would look at it and still be so tired, I would just turn it off and move the time. And then I was running into the same situation where I was not working out because I couldn't get up. Then I was like, what is the problem? What is the actual thing that I'm trying to do here? I said, okay, if I would need to get up earlier and I'm someone who doesn't drink coffee, that means I need to get enough sleep, a certain number of hours, so that I can get up. I was like, okay, that means I need to actually also go to sleep early. I can't just say I'm going to get up in the morning early. I have to actually go to sleep early so that my body feels rested enough to get up. Then I had to try to go to sleep very early, but I wasn't used to that. I would just lay there, close my eyes, and still not be able to sleep. Eventually, though, I was able to get into the routine of that. But then in the mornings, even when I got the sleep, I still needed a way to get up. So I would just turn on my light while I was still in bed, and that would just shock me awake. And that's basically how I did it. Like I said, it took me weeks to get into the habit of going to sleep earlier, getting up earlier, and then actually doing the workout itself. It took me a lot of failures, a lot of me feeling bad that I wasn't getting this skill and that I was not having the discipline that I was trying to get and even sticking with it. But over time, I was able to get the skill more in there. And even now, there are some times where I don't go to sleep early enough and then I'm just tired in the next morning. And maybe I'll skip the workout that day. So even though I've been working on this skill and I've gotten much better at it, I'm still progressing in it. Nothing is perfect. And it's not like I'm going to be perfectly doing this all the time. But I did look at it like this is the skill that I want to learn, which was having more discipline in terms of waking up early and working out. Despite the all the stuff that happened, I still was able to do it. I set alarms, I wrote notes to myself, just those types of things that helped me. I even had an accountability buddy, but this person would just ask me, "Hey, did you work out this morning?" All those types of things. So there was someone for me to answer to. Again, it all came down to me, but I had to put all of these other things in place to try to get better at the skill that I was trying to learn. So, I mentioned this before, right? Even if you're in a lab, even if you're a designer, you're not going to get everything right the first time, or the second time, or the third time. It's going to take you a few times to get into the groove of things. The main thing is just to not get discouraged. I think it's really easy to get discouraged and say, oh, I'm never going to learn this. Oh, I'm not good at anything. And that's not the case at all. I mentioned this, but none of us there are skills that we're not born with. That just is what it is. But we don't need to feel bad about that. Like I said, especially if you look at your life and if you look at building skills as being a fashion designer or somebody working in a lab, you are experimenting. Of course, you're experimenting to get better at whatever it is that you want to get better at. But if you see it as an experiment, you're not going to be so hard on yourself when you mess up or when you don't wake up early or when you don't do XYZ or when you go over your boundaries. Another thing that I'm trying to work on as well, right? I think it's so easy for us to bash ourselves and say, oh, I didn't do this right the first time, or I don't know how to do this thing, so I must be a failure. That's not the case at all. The important thing is to stay curious and experiment because it's easier to figure things out the more you experiment. You figure out what you like to do, what you don't want to do, and how you want to improve things overall. So I'm really happy that I went to this Scholars Weekend. I'm glad that I did this workshop. It really made me think more about my journey as well and how I really could not have imagined where I am today or whatever my goals were before, but I'm really grateful and very happy. It's just been interesting where I have landed, and I hope that you also continue to look at your life like an experiment. Think of yourself as a designer. And one quote I want to leave you with, actually, from a book by Bill Burnett and Dave Evans, is you are always designing your life, intentionally or by default. So your life is going to go, right? Time does not stop for any of us. So your life is going to go the way it goes. And yes, there are things that we cannot control, but there are things that we can control, such as building new skills to push us further into the goals that we want. And for me, I want to be an active participant in that. So I will leave it there for today. But one question I do have for you is, what skill do you want to experiment or design? What is your ultimate goal for building that skill? And what are some ways that you can practice or remind yourself for the next 7 days? Thanks for listening to another episode of Lush Life No Labels. Like and subscribe to this podcast. Y'all, leave me some comments as well. I definitely want to start dialogue with you. I love when listeners ask me questions because it makes me think and it helps me bring other topics to you. Cheers to your lush life, and see you later.